All right, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We are so excited to partner with the After School Alliance to bring you today's webinar. My name is Brooks Mitchell, and I'm the Education Coordinator here at StarNet. So the theme of today's webinar, and again, we're partnering with the After School Alliance, is after-school partnerships, how libraries and after-school providers can really connect and come together. So you'll see, before we get started, our poll question up in the top middle of the screen. It's, has your library partnered with after-school partners before? So I'll give you guys about 10 seconds to answer that, and then I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out, and we'll take a look at the results. In the meantime, while you're voting, just a couple of kind of reminders. You don't need microphone capabilities for this webinar. You'll basically just kind of be listening in and asking any questions that you have in the chat box. Please, please, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. I'll try to pull those, and we'll have a couple of Q&A sessions. Also, I'm not sure if I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded so that we can upload it to our YouTube account and to our StarNet archived webinar. So just be aware that this webinar is being recorded. All right, great. Let's take a look at our poll. Let's see if you guys can see this. All right, it looks like a lot of you have done after-school partnerships, but then a lot of you haven't, so that's a great mix. We're hoping that we can provide some insight for you that have, or insight and suggestions for those of you that have not done after-school partnerships. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out. And I'm just going to run through a few reminders, kind of talk about StarNet for a little bit before turning it over to our presenters today, Melissa Ballard and Dan Gilbert from the After School Alliance. All right, so we of course want to thank our sponsors, NSF and NASA. They allow us to provide this incredible programming and to put on these webinars. We are of course very appreciative of all that they do for us. Just a reminder that it is always a good time to join StarNet. StarNet is our online community of librarians. It is where we can provide STEM resources for you all, provide professional development resources as well. So as always, go check out starnetlibraries.org and make sure to sign up for our newsletter as well. A few professional development opportunities coming up. Our next webinar will be October 4th, and that is International Observe the Moon Night. We're going to be joined by Brian Day of NASA to discuss some of the different programming activity ideas that you can do with your library for International Observe the Moon Night. That webinar is going to be on October 4th at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. So you can follow that link, or you can go to, and Greg, Greg, if you'll put the webinar registration link in the chat as well. We are starting to do some more how-to activities, or how-to videos for our activities. You can find a link down there. We also are attending a few different conferences coming up, including CalCon, MPLA, ASTC. So check and see if you're going to any of the conferences that we'll be at, and stop by and say hello or come to one of our sessions. And for those of you that are unable to watch our webinars in real time, we archive all of our webinars, we upload them to YouTube, and you can see that link down on the screen in the bottom right. So again, if you have to dip out a little early today, that's okay. This will be on YouTube within a couple of days. All right, just wanted to talk about the STEM Activity Clearinghouse. And I see Greg's got the registration link for our next webinar in the chat box. The STEM Activity Clearinghouse is where we've kind of cultivated numerous, over 100 different hands-on activities that are perfect for a library setting. You can see the example here, Sun Cookies. That's always a fun one. But go check out the STEM Activity Clearinghouse. Go check out some of those reviews, or check out some of those activities, and please leave a review. Let us know what you think. Let us know what worked for you, what didn't work, what you would want other librarians to know when doing a hands-on activity. And the last few reminders, make sure to follow us on social media. You see our Facebook page and our Twitter handle right there. There is a link in the middle to sign up for our newsletter. And for those of you that are looking for a certificate of attendance for like professional development reasons, if you take the survey, it's through SurveyMonkey, right after this webinar, you'll actually automatically be redirected when I close out the room to that SurveyMonkey link. And then after you complete the survey, you'll have the certificate of attendance at the very end. So make sure to do the survey, you'll get the certificate at the end. If for some reason it doesn't come up, you can't find the link, you can feel free to shoot me an email after the webinar, and I will send you the certificate of attendance. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close out my slides. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Melissa Ballard of the After School Alliance. Hey, Melissa.
Hey, how are you?
Good. You're coming in loud and clear. So I'm going to go ahead and close myself out. I will be in the chat box. I'll be taking your questions. And yeah, so without further ado, Melissa Ballard.
Great. Thanks. I'm so excited to be here, everyone. So my name is Melissa, and I'm the STEM manager at the After School Alliance. I'll also hear from my colleague, Dan Gilbert, who does many things here as well. So we have an action-packed agenda for you guys today, and a little bit of background on our work with StarNet. So in addition to the sort of the online platform you see, all the great webinars and resources that they send out, there's also a component of an NSF project that develops exhibits and sends those all around the U.S. to various libraries. So we started as being a partner on that project, and have also continued work with them and thinking about ways to bring libraries and after-school programs closer together. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. First, I'm going to do a little bit of the after-school landscape. So thinking about who are the players, the different types of programs, which can help kind of get you thinking about how you might reach out or where you might connect with folks. And then we're going to give you guys a sneak peek of a report that we'll be releasing later this week. We did a survey to the after-school field about their experience partnering with libraries. So we'll share some of those findings with you guys as well. And then I'll turn over to Dan. He's going to talk about one of our upcoming opportunities, which will be great for partnering, but also libraries is our theme for 2017. So Dan will tell you a little bit more about that. And then finally, I'll share some useful STEM resources from the after-school field. I think the sort of path to STEM is a little bit similar in the sense that, most of the frontline educators and after-school programs don't have a STEM background. The field is trying to figure out, what are our goals for STEM? What are we doing? What do we want youth to really get out of those experiences? So there's interesting tools and research that's been done, so I'll talk a little bit about those. And then finally, some of the next steps that we'll be working on with StarNet around library after-school partnership. So, the after-school landscape. People get, I think, a little overwhelmed when you think about how diverse and how wide the different types of after-school programs are. So I'll start off with one definition that we use a lot. And so when we say after-school programs, we're talking about comprehensive programs. And so rather than like a once-a-week club or childcare or babysitting, we're talking about programs that are offering, opening up their sites to kids, 3 to 4 hours a day, 3 to 4 times a week. They typically will get, a snack or a meal, some homework help, and then their choice of enrichment activities. And so this has some really important implications for equity and really supporting the whole child. So we'll get into those a little bit later. So most of you have probably heard, the sort of national providers by name. So you can probably, you have a Boys and Girls Club in your community. You might have a Girls Inc. in your community. But there's really a lot of other diversity outside of these national providers and their local chapters. So just most schools or districts might run their own set of after-school programs. Some of the parks and recs will run their own programs as well. We even count local community organizations, religious organizations, immigrant or refugee service providers might also have a youth component as well. So it's a really diverse field, and it's, you have to kind of look high and low for what we would define as an after-school program, because they go by many names. So a little bit more background about the field as well. So this is from our study that we do every 5 years called America After 3 p.m., where we ask parents and households what their kids are doing in the hours after school. And so from this, we know that 10.2 million kids across the U.S. are attending these comprehensive programs every week in their communities. Some of the interesting things we found as well is, demand is always increasing. So it's almost like the more parents hear about these types of opportunities, the more demands they have in terms of their work schedule, the more they want these types of programs for their kids. So right now we know that for every child in a program, there are 2 more waiting to get in. And we also have state numbers, so which I think a lot of folks find that helpful when you're doing like grant proposals, things like that. You can find out how many kids in your state are in after-school programs, what the demand is, and we also have some summer numbers as well. I think important to note that the sort of both attendance and demand among a lot of these populations that we care about is much higher. So for African American and Latino households, for low-income folks, we really see that they're attending these programs in larger numbers. And then also from this survey, to give you a sense of sort of where kids are going, we've got libraries there. So 7% of those 10.2 million kids their parents or guardians are saying that they're going on site to an after-school program at their library. The most obviously, the biggest chunk are either going to a school-based program or they're going to one of the local chapters of those national providers. What this does not necessarily reflect is the kind of behind-the-scenes partnerships that a parent might not know about. So there could definitely be a library working with an after-school program, a school-based one, providing services to the after-school educators or reading lists, things like that. But a parent might necessarily name that when they're taking a survey like this. So it's just an FYI when you interpret these numbers. And then so again, kind of what these programs are offering kids, the sort of snack or meal, which I know a lot of libraries offer our summer feeding sites. So it's a version of that program for the school year that a lot of folks plug into. Again, the homework help, and then all the enrichment activities. Another, I think, interest point where the after-school field and library field intersects is around parent and family engagement. And so I'm sure, as you know, a lot of times, some types of families, some populations really struggle with connecting to school day administrators and teachers, and sort of other types of community organizations, after-school programs included, can serve as that link. And here's another interesting infographic that I like to show. And so a lot of people in the education space, of course, talk about the achievement gap. But we in the sort of out-of-school time informal learning space would like to talk about the learning gap. And so what this is showing is sort of 5 different types of that of out-of-school time learning that they really add up. So when you're comparing kids from low-income families and kids from middle-class families, so this is not even high-income families, you have the 6,000-hour learning gap that accumulates just through 6th grade. So we're looking at pre-K, that includes the extra family reading time, weekend day trips, summer camp, and about half of that is just for the after-school activities. And so when we kind of add that up conservatively, that actually comes out to like 4 to 6 academic years of additional learning time that the kids are getting in those differences. So it's really significant to have those additional opportunities for certain populations, and that really can address some equity issues. And so I think the other thing that I always want to flag for folks too is, we think about the type of learning activities that after-school programs are offering, same with, science centers, museums, libraries as well, is you want the learning to be different than what they would experience in school. And so some of the sort of more explicit ways that the after-school field likes to define itself around youth development. So really, how do we empower young people? How do we build their socio-emotional skills? How do we provide opportunities for positive relationships with adults, and the sort of 21st century skills? And you're doing this in an environment that's low stakes, that's flexible, and of course connects with community partners like libraries. And then again, the hands-on experiential approach to learning, project-based, these are kind of buzzwords as well, but I think it really does speak to having a sort of different type of learning experience. And so I showed you guys some of the what the sort of individual on the ground programs might look like. There's also some of these sort of local, regional, and state entities that you can connect to. So After Alliance, of course, for sort of national policy and advocacy. The National After School Association is a professional membership organization for the field. And there's also state conferences as well that do professional development that welcome educators from all types of institutions. I know that at the National Summer Learning Conference, I always see lots of libraries there. And then in every state, there's a statewide after-school network. I mentioned Brooks will throw the link in the chat box if he hasn't already. But those are also a good place to reach out to connect, to see what's going on in the after-school space in your state. And you can get on people's listservs or social media and things like that to stay in the loop. And so then just briefly a little bit more about us. So our sort of main charge is federal policy that impacts youth and families. We have an annual day on Capitol Hill, and we have this grassroots advocacy event every October called Lights On Afterschool. And so that's what Dan's going to talk to you about in just a moment. We also do a lot around research and field building. So of course, in field building, we like to build partnerships with like-minded groups like libraries. We also do a lot of work with the Science Center museum field and some higher ed folks as well. But we like to document best practices, innovative models. Our organization does a lot of free webinars, just like Space Science Institute, blogs, toolkits, etc. that we share with the field. So definitely feel free to check out our website as well. Again, anything there is free. We had a webinar last week about addressing hate and bias in educational environments, and we have one on Thursday as well. So you are more than welcome to join those and share with colleagues. All right, so I'm going to pause for a couple seconds just to see if there are any questions before I move on to the next section.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Yeah, everybody, if you have any questions so far, feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll wait about just a few seconds and before we move on. Melissa, I saw somebody commenting in the chat box that transportation was a tough issue in terms of after-school partnerships with libraries, but I told her to hold off on that thought because I think you're kind of discussing that in just a little, right?
Yep, yeah, definitely.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to jump into the next section then, and definitely please feel free, folks, and put your questions in the chat box.
Yeah, we do have one question. Do we have any resources for grant opportunities?
We don't have great resources for grant opportunities. We do have some funding pages that are sort of general guides to funding, which I think just sort of describe the different types of funding streams. I think a fair amount of the funding opportunities that we send out to our audience, generally, like any community organization can apply to. So I'm sure libraries would be eligible as well. I think the best place to plug into those is either on our blog or on our social media. So just sort of constantly looking for us to send out those updates. And unfortunately, we don't have a really great updated website. I wish we did. But the state networks that and the link went out. A lot of those have like current. Sorry, my phone's on. All of those have sort of current lists on their website as well.
Great, thanks.
All right. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our survey, and I think this really raised some of the challenges that I'm sure you guys have experienced for those of you who tried to think about partnerships. I'm curious to know your experiences as well. And so this came out of Afterschool Alliance and StarNet was working together on some projects. They're like, well, we think this is a great idea, but like, are people actually partnering together? Do they see it the same way? So this is a survey that we put out to our audience. So these are after-school program providers. And we were really excited about the findings. So in total, we looked at responses from about 365 after-school providers. And almost everyone said that there was definitely benefits to be had with partnering public libraries. And digging into some of the responses, I think people really had a sense that public libraries were doing really great things in their community. And not just in K-12 education, but working with other populations, working with adults, working with families. So there's really a lot of goodwill towards the library field from the folks that we surveyed. And about a quarter of them had already done some sort of partnership with their local library. And so just a little bit of background on the sort of demographics of these folks. We did have a really high representation of rural programs, and about a third were suburban. And then of all the respondents, most of these people would be after-school programs that have multiple program sites, usually 2 to 5 sites. But across those, we do have some really large programs serving like more than 1,000 kids, although most of them had less than 500 kids that they were serving in their communities. And then to get a sense of the types of ages they served, pretty much everybody worked with elementary students. Another large chunk with middle school. I think most people in our field know that middle school is a really crucial developmental point. And so those after-school programs are sort of focused on that middle school, high school transition. I will also like to, when we start thinking about, sort of ways that are really good places to partner, we always hear from the ground that, it's much harder to provide sort of interesting and varied activities for high schoolers. So I know a lot of you who do stuff with teens. I think that's also a place that you could work with after-school programs on developing new programming. So what are after-school programs doing with their library partners? So many people were doing summer reading initiatives. They were bringing their kids to the library just to do checking out books using computers. Almost half of them were doing sort of special evening events. And then a large chunk also having librarian or library staff come visit them to deliver programming. or went to the library to actually sit in on a public program itself. And then we saw about 30% were doing some sort of STEM activity, which is of interest to the StarNet audience, and sort of lower levels of some of this, perhaps more behind the scenes support of helping with curriculum development, whether that was for literacy, reading, and then professional development where the library staff actually was training after school educators, again, usually around literacy, but other topics as well. And then what we also thought was interesting, sorry, I think my graph did not show up very well. We have a fair amount of folks that were doing multiple types of partnerships. So you've got, this whole section that's between like 2 and 6 activities. Lots of people were doing multiple things. And this sort of a smaller number, but definitely an interesting number of folks who are sort of these super users of their library partners. So, they're doing 7 to 10 of these activities that were listed here. And so I kind of wanted there's a little bit more nuance in the report itself, which will come out on Thursday, Friday. But these are some of the big issue areas that were flagged across all of the sort of open-ended responses. So there are definitely some challenges, I think, like the person who asked the question mentioned, around being close to a library, being close to the after-school partner, and how do you get kids in between. Of course, a lot of folks stated that they need more ideas of what to do together, whether particularly if it was around STEM or some of those other topics. I think these last 4 are really about communication. So some things as simple as, it would be great to be on the library's email listserv about activities, which, of course, we know, it's certainly we'd love for libraries to share that, but it's also, I think, up for people to sign up for those email lists. I'm sure many of you do. So we can take some of these recommendations with, the grain of salt that the partnership is a two-way street. But these are definitely things that after-school folks were saying en masse about what could support library partnerships. So I think a question I think a lot of folks have is, what is the relationship between proximity of a program and its likelihood to partner? Of those who had partners, so that 75%, about half of them had a public library in walking distance of their program. And so being able to take kids there just in terms of cost of transportation was not as much of an issue. I think we're running into issues are more around like the logistics of like getting all the kids together to walk to the library. Some people had some concerns around, if they're already in the after-school space, they're already kind of letting loose, bringing them into a quiet library space is maybe not the best fit. And then there are also about a third of folks who could get there, they considered it to be close, but would need to take some sort of transportation to get there. And then again, concerns around it's very expensive for busing and other costs of public transportation. And so I think a key takeaway of this is that the transportation issue can be a barrier, but it doesn't always have to be, particularly if, traveling to library isn't always the best option. Of those sort of 25% who had never worked at the library before, we definitely saw higher proportions of those folks, I think, indicating issues around sort of travel and distance. So they weren't able to find a transportation solution, or they didn't feel like one was close by. And again, still among those who have done partnerships, still are citing these sort of transportation logistics issues as well. But I think, what's, again, part of this sort of communication solution and sort of us coming together and brainstorming ideas is that to partner with each other, you really don't need to bring kids on site to the library. There's other models that you can look at, other ways to work together, other ways to leverage each other's resources.
And Melissa, I hate to interrupt, but I just launched a poll. If we could just maybe wait a few seconds to get a little bit of feedback on that. The question is, what challenges have you encountered in partnering with an after-school program?
Yeah, I do see, highest, of course, still being sort of transportation and logistics. I'm also curious to what the perception differences are and what kinds of solutions can we have to get around that. I certainly know, especially for small libraries, it's really hard to send a staff member off-site to do program, particularly in that sort of 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock hour on weekdays. Just gonna scan in the chat box a little bit.
Oh, yeah. All right. So I'll go ahead and end the poll and broadcast those results real quick. And we can check out what the responses in the chat are.
Cool. Yes, and definitely, like lots of people said, funding was an issue as well. And so I see Lisa's comment around a challenge in providing food. If you're bringing kids to your site, but maybe working with a program that already is tapping their state dollars for after-school snacks and meals, they can eat first and then come to you. All right. Brooks, are you? Oh, wait, you're good with the poll. All right.
Oh yeah, you can carry on.
Carrying on. So some of these ideas, again, sort of coming from the after-school perspective of what can help support and grow library partnerships. Again, the sort of communication, people wanting to know what program is available, what services can actually be offered. There were definitely a fair amount of folks who just didn't know who to reach out to at the library. And then, again, sort of ideas for partnership. You have transportation issues on there again. I think one of the things to note about this sort of the need around educational programming and professional development, there's certainly, I think a lot of folks feel sort of strapped to their program. They also want to take kids out. So that, again, that request for having a library staff member come to them to offer programs in PD. But I think also for existing programs in PD, thinking about tailoring that to fit with what an after-school program would need rather than like a member of the general public. So I'll talk a little bit about STEM partnerships specifically, and then we can talk about some ideas for how to address these challenges. So again, sort of Space Science Institute and StarNet, we all love STEM. So that's why we made sure to ask a couple of questions about STEM partnerships. So for those who had already worked at the library, about 30% had done STEM, which is not the highest of the categories, but not the lowest either. And then of those who had never worked at the public library before, 63% had never even considered a partnership in STEM. So some of the sort of open-ended responses were pretty much fit into these styles of, I wasn't aware that libraries had STEM, or I thought of them more as a literacy resource. So definitely some challenges in how we can expand folks thinking about what the library does and is interested in doing. And then we gave lots of really great ideas. We put these into some general categories with the idea that we'd work on a resource to follow that really kind of fleshes these out. But again, I think a fair amount of them fall into the sort of traditional library supports, but specific to STEM. So is there a STEM book list that you could pull together to send to folks? Can you help kids research STEM topics? Can you help them with sort of STEM-rich reading and writing? Are there STEM, public programming that your library is offering? And again, with the on-site programming, I think, generally after-school field is still trying to do more STEM. So I think are always looking for sort of content expertise, people who really know how to facilitate STEM activities. So those I think are always welcome. A couple of things I'll point out is the sort of tech access. So people definitely recognize that libraries have computers and librarians know how to teach tech and media literacy. And for a lot of our school programs, their schools, like computer labs, are closed to them after school hours. So schools not wanting to spend the janitory budgets or to keep lights on or things. So there's definitely a real need for access to computers and to tech. There's a fair amount of folks who had mentioned the making and tinkering in libraries. So people knew that a lot of libraries had maker spaces or 3D printers, things like that. I think there was an interest around connecting around those. And again, I think with the parent engagement, whether it's STEM family nights, STEM fairs, maker showcases, things like that. So I think in conclusion, I think a lot of these sort of barriers and challenges are really about, an intentional communication. So, we encourage you to just go ahead, look up find your list of local after-school programs, figure out who the right contact would be. The small program, it might be the executive director. If it's a large multi-site program, there's probably someone who's in charge of sort of like training and curriculum for a few sites. If you find the right contact, you can sit down, have a meeting, figure out what your guys' both interests are for the upcoming year, think about what the current offerings are and what you can plug in. And I think doing this sort of creative brainstorming together is really, really useful. And I think hope where StarNet and the After Alliance can help, we'll be working on a new guide that sort of outlines some, I guess, more detailed partnership ideas and specific activity and curriculum ideas. So you really have something more tangible to bring to a potential after-school partner. I'll also flag too, maybe Brooks can add to the chat, as our friends at the Global Family Research Project just came out with what they call the Ideabook. And so it's partnerships for libraries around family engagement. And think about like a third of them are actually technically with after-school partners. So those provide some rich examples as well. Okay, I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Melissa. So up next we have Dan, joining from just a couple of rooms over from Melissa, I believe. And so yeah, Dan, you're coming in. Your video's coming in. Do you want to say a couple of things?
Awesome. Yeah, so thank you all so much for having me. So my name again is Dan Gilbert. I'm a project manager here at the After School Alliance, where I'm a member of the communications team. And I'm going to be providing a basic explainer for what Lights On After School is and how you all in the library community could potentially use it as a way to reach out to youth, to parents, and after school programs in your community, and also just build relationships more broadly with your community. So Melissa did a great job of just going over some of the recent results of the survey and just kind of the overall relationship between libraries and after-school programs from the program perspective. And so going into Lights On After School is really an opportunity for us to go into a particular way, and basically this is a great opportunity for you to build those relationships with after-school programs in your area if you don't already have them, or to deepen relationships that you may already have with some of these programs, and also to just raise the profile of your library, any programming that you may provide for youth, and things like that. With parents in your communities, with local businesses, with anyone who may be in the network of the after-school program but may not be as closely linked with the library. So Lights On After School is really a chance for after-school programs to celebrate and showcase exactly what they're doing every day and make their case to the community, to parents, and to policymakers in the media that after-school programs are essential for students and their families. It's also an opportunity to highlight the changing face of what after school really looks like for kids. It's not just daycare. Programs are providing engaging, hands-on enrichment opportunities for kids that enhance and build upon school-time learning in really unique ways, as I'm sure many of you know. And so while some people may already be aware of what these programs are doing, others may not. And that's why hosting a Lights On After School event is a great opportunity for after school programs and their partners to build relationships throughout the community and create brand new advocates. So Lights On After School allows programs and partners to bring attention to the need for more after-school programs, the need for more resources and communities for anything that provides engaging programming for youth. And it gives programs and partners the freedom to create events that do this in a way that they feel works best for their area and for the programs and the youth in them. So we are coming up, October 26th of this year is the 18th annual Lights On After School, which has been around for as long as the After School Alliance has. Partners for Lights On After School include 4-H After School, Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, 21st Century Community Learning Center programs, and many, many more. Lights On After School events generate thousands of newspaper, radio, and TV stories across the country every year, including every major media market. And obviously, we here at the Alliance are very interested in the kind of advocacy policy angle and making sure that there's plenty of resources for these programs. So we do also make sure that we have particular media coverage in targeted congressional districts and things like that, just to make sure that we can take all of that grassroots, all that public support and awareness, and turn it into real tangible results for youth around the country. This year, Library After School partnerships are officially one of this year's Lights On After School themes. We already have 48 events registered at libraries across the country, and I'm sure many more that libraries are going to be engaged in, whether it's helping to plan the festivities or being engaged in some other way. Last year we had 250 events hosted at libraries, and through that and through our partnership with StarNet and a lot of other different areas, we've really made it an explicit goal this year to promote school library partnerships, so that's why it's one of our official themes. While we are still short of our number from last year, most registrations do happen in the month of October. So while we may have a ways to go, we hope to boost this year's celebrations even higher. So if you guys are interested in hosting Lights On After School events or working with programs in your area, we encourage you to check that out. You can register for Lights On After School events through our website, and we'll make sure to have that link available for you during the webinar. Programs' goals for hosting Lights On After School events are typically to build awareness and long-term relationships and support for programs and for similar programs in their area and state, although obviously that can take a lot of different approaches depending on the size of the program, how big their network is, how much support they may have with the public. But the question for you guys as libraries is how you can leverage Lights On After School as a partner to help engage the programs and other partners in your area. So us here at the After School Alliance, for us, this is really where relationships with the media and with policymakers come in. So Lights On After School, while it is all focused on this one big celebration, Lights On After School is more than just a one-day thing. Through the course of planning a Lights On After School event, programs and program partners like libraries, or if the libraries are hosting the programs and they themselves, you can end up strengthening relationships and building vital new ones in your community. If you want to know more about the planning process, to make sure that should you want to partner with a program in your area, your participation in the event is planned with intention and clear goals for what you want to come out of it. We have a lot of free resources on the After School Alliance website. So if you're interested in maybe hosting an event or in partnering with a program in your area to do that, then I encourage you to go to afterschoolalliance.org. And you can just click on the Lights On After School tab at the top of the screen, and it'll take you through a ton of free resources that we've generated over the years. So at this point, you probably have the question, what do programs actually do during the Lights On After School celebrations? So we try to provide programs with as much incentive and flexibility to participate as we can, and to provide lots of very basic ideas for them to use. Lights On After School events really don't need to be hard to plan or expensive in order to be successful. So there are a lot of quick ways to celebrate Lights On After School that don't take a lot of time, money, or resources. Just to give you a quick idea, some events just download our light bulb art that we have on our website for free, and you can just have kids decorate the light bulb art for your Lights On After School event, and students can write on the light bulbs why after school or why their library is important to them, and then afterwards you can work with program staff to mail them to elected officials' local offices or to mail them to the media, just to make a nice little feel-good story. Open houses and site tours can also be fun ways to showcase all of the great things that programs do every day. And so often programs will invite partners and local leaders and policymakers to join parents on a student-led tour, which gives the community the opportunity to hear from the kids who are most directly affected by the programs. And often the kids themselves can be the most effective kind of messenger for these kinds of stories. After school programs this year have also registered to host family game nights, art and talent shows, carnivals, festivals, things like that and more. And so I'm going to dig a little into the details on ways that you as libraries can get involved. So there are a lot of ways that community partners like libraries can get involved in Lights On After School, even if you're not the program host. But if you're the program host, then the sky's the limit. And I encourage you to check out all the resources on our website. So you can reach out to programs that are celebrating Lights On After School in your area to see what they're up to this year. So if you want to know what programs in your area may be celebrating Lights On After School and see who you should be reaching out to, on our website at the URL that was on the previous slide, here I'll pull it back up, is, sorry about that. I will make sure that I program this into here we go, in the chat box. So through that link that I just plugged in, you can go to our interactive map that shows all of the places that events have been registered for this year's Lights On After Schools. So if you are interested in participating, but you don't know about whether or not there are programs in your area that may be celebrating, I encourage you to check out our website just to see who around you may be celebrating. So you can use that as a reason to reach out to them and build a new relationship with those programs. So there are really a lot of ways to get involved in Lights On After School. This year we have a lot of examples. If you're just looking for a really simple way that doesn't take a whole lot of your time or resources, you can just ask if you can set up a table where you can share at the program's Lights On After School event, where you can share resources that talk about how your library supports youth in the community and the kind of programming and resources that you have available. You can also obviously volunteer to allow them to host their Lights On After School celebration at your library. Obviously, a lot of after school programs are operating on shoestring budgets. So if they are looking for a place that's maybe bigger than their typical program site to really take their Lights On After School event to the next level, then maybe just having access to your facilities could be a great step and a great way to build or strengthen a relationship with a program. This year, we also have other great ideas that are available if you just look at at our website. So this year, we have programs that are hosting read-along events at libraries with after-school programs and local officials. Some libraries that are hosting their own programs are having open houses where they just invite the entire community to come and see what they're doing at their program every day. You can also, obviously, we were talking about the importance of these kind of STEM activities and how that's really underrepresented and how a lot of after-school programs don't even know about the STEM-themed or the STEM-related opportunities that may be available to them through libraries. So you can highlight STEM-themed activities in a science fair or something like that at the library, or even just participate with a program that may be having a science fair themselves. We also encourage you to work with after-school programs to reach out to other partners in your area, like businesses, museums, or science centers. This is really a great opportunity because the way that maybe the after-school programs in your community have relationships with businesses or other community-based organizations or resources in your community that you may not have relationships with, and vice versa. So it's really a great opportunity for you to kind of work together to expand the reach of these Lights On After School events. Obviously, building off of that, we encourage you to just, even if you don't have a lot of time or resources to participate in the planning of their event, we encourage you to help with outreach. You can put up Lights On After School posters in your library just to help broadcast that this is going on to the community. You can include a shout out relating to their Lights On After School events in your newsletter to members of the library, just inviting them and letting them know that you're involved. If you do collaborative outreach with programs, you can get policymakers and media to show up, which can help raise awareness around both the importance of the resources that your library is bringing to the table and also to the great work that the programs are doing. And so on the screen here, you can see this year's Lights On After School poster. Every time any program registers to host a Lights On After School event, they automatically get sent 10 of these posters. If there's a program in your area and you want to just like reach out and see if they have a poster that you can put up in your library to help expand their outreach, I'm sure that a lot of them would be more than happy to send that to you, assuming they have some left over. There's really no wrong way to get involved in Lights On After School, so we really encourage you to just reach out to the programs in your area and just see what you can do to help. It's a great way to expand your relationship with them and build off of that, and just to expand your reach in the community as well. As I mentioned earlier, we have tons of free resources on our website to help you engage in the planning process or reach out to programs in your area. Obviously, all of these links on the page will help you go through that process. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Dan Gilbert, and I'm putting my email address into the chat box now. So if you have any questions about how you can engage in this process, we would be more than happy to help you. So thank you so much. And I think that pretty much covers my little bit. So I will pass it back off to Melissa.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. Well, you passed it back off to me, not Melissa. But so I just wanted to take a moment, Dan and Melissa, while you're still on, see if there's any questions in the chat box that you guys might be able to address. I know one thing that kind of has popped up in the chat box is how do you reach teens in an after-school program? And I know that's reaching teens and bringing teens to the library can be extremely difficult. Melissa, do you maybe have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think getting teens to any kind of program can be challenging. And I think as you saw kind of from our survey results, we definitely see lower proportions of after-school programs that have teen services. But engaging older youth is definitely a strong interest from the field. I think I'll put a link in the chat in a minute, but I think some models that have been successful is bringing in at least 3 to 4 partners to work on that issue. Particularly because it's hard to give, right? Like, you can think about like an ecosystem of learning opportunities. So like teens would need something to go to like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They're not going to go to something like 4 days a week consistently. So to really connect them with opportunities, you have to really be intentionally talking to other program providers in your area and also have good relationships to the schools or a teacher that can really either funnel and help support teams to actually get to your programming. But I think it's definitely a challenge that we see in our field as well.
Right. Right, certainly. I see Val, Mel, and Heather, their suggestion is pizza rolls. You can bring a teen in with pizza rolls. That's a good idea. And Gail, I like your idea here that doing community service, getting those volunteer hours, it's always a great way to get teens involved with programs. I've had success with organizations I've done that with in the past. All right, we'll let you guys ask a few more questions in the chat box. A team library council, yeah, that's a great idea. On one hand, you're getting direct feedback from those teenagers, and on the other hand, you're also putting them kind of in more of a leadership role and treating them, more like adults as opposed to children. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds. Any last questions? And I'll go ahead and bring over this web links pod.
And Brooks,
so you can click on any of these hyperlinks to take you to some of those websites that we have gone over during this webinar. I'll also be emailing you guys afterwards with a link to the SlideShare files of the PowerPoints. So that way you'll have all those resources.
Sort of resources that are really useful for the after-school field. And again, I think
the same challenges
of trying to think through like,
I'll go ahead and put
what is the sort of level of rigor that we can offer in STEM, given that like most educators don't have a background in the STEM field.
I'll go ahead and
even though people are interested, professional development is time-consuming and expensive. So I think weighing some of those questions has definitely been going on with after-school practitioners for several years. So I just want to share a few resources that you might find helpful. The first is this report from the National Research Council. So I normally don't say you should ask to anyone, go read this like research document. You should read this research document. And it's about 90 pages. It's a synthesis of all of the current research that's come out around informal science learning, as well as like after school research. But it kind of comes to these 3 big conclusions. So if we want to say like what is a successful, productive, even quality out of school time STEM program, so whether that's in an after-school program, a summer program, or other informal settings like science centers or libraries, these are the sort of 3 big things that the program should be doing, sort of bare minimum. And so the first is that they should be looking to engage young people intellectually, academically, socially, and emotionally. So then this also moves us away from the sort of just a sole academic focus, but that we have to really think about, what is, culturally relevant, what is, like what reflects their lives that they live, and the content that we choose and the approach that we go to delivering these STEM programs. The second is around responding to young people's interests, experiences, and cultural practices. So again, wanting to be culturally responsive, really in STEM, thinking about ways to connect what's happening in kids' everyday lives to the things that you're teaching them. And then finally, the other things we hit on in one of the previous questions is that productive STEM should be connected. You know, recognizing that, of course, kids learn in all sorts of settings, including the school, the home, the community, and, you know, sort of more, I guess, structured learning environments like after-school programs or like library public programming. But particularly, especially for older youth, it's really important that all of the folks who provide these types of opportunities are talking to each other and intentionally designing programs in their community. So the end result is that from pre-K through graduation, young people have a variety of different types of activities that they can engage with, and that the adults in their lives know where to direct them to next. So really, again, it is research, but it is very, very useful and well synthesized research. And so I think a lot of folks are asking, like, what should the goal of our work be? I think this document really answers some of that. The next thing I'll point you to, so this came out of a study that the After School Alliance did a few years ago, where we asked sort of the various stakeholders in after school STEM education, whether they're providers, some of those like systems builders, and national leaders, you know, what is actually reasonable for kids to be learning, right? Like, you're not in, you know, science class an hour, you know, a couple times a week. These might be once a week. They could be drop-in programs. What can we actually expect for kids to get out of them? So the sort of experts in the field came to sort of these three sets, and there are sub-indicators and indicators for each. And so one is around developing an interest in STEM and learning about STEM. So I think a lot of people, you know, do evaluation around interest and engagement. Sometimes can be the easier thing to measure. The second is around sort of a capacity to productively engage in learning activities. So these are what, you know, those of you familiar with the Next Generation Science Standards, we're talking about like those STEM skills, so the doing of STEM. And this is really, you know, if we're doing all these sort of hands-on experiential project-based activities, you know, that's where you can really build these types of productive skills. And then lastly, you know, we can definitely expect kids to come to value the goals of STEM and value the learning of it itself. And so kind of lumped into this is, you know, things around, you know, imagining yourself as a contributor to science, identifying with the STEM fields, thinking about career goals, career awareness. But it's a useful framework that's been defined by practitioners and by the after-school field about what they think is reasonable. So it's embedded in a larger report, which I think Brooks will add to the chat. But it's on page 3, and it just gives you a quick summary of that. There is a longer report attached to that as well, but it's most useful for people to just take a look at that one page. The next thing I'll point you to is called Click to Science, and this was developed to address the issue of expensive and time-consuming professional development. It still is time-consuming, but their model is by doing virtual professional development. It can make things a lot easier, particularly for places in sort of rural or low-resource communities. So they really focus on what they call the 20 skills that make STEM click. And so these, again, are not just like content-based, but more about facilitating informal STEM. And again, all of their stuff is free. They do regular webinars and blogs. So a really good site to know. And I know they have just started a project that's actually joint with some library audiences, and really focusing on rural educators. So I'm sure they'll have some new resources in the next year. The other thing I'll point you to is that there are a fair amount of really good resources for curriculum that's low cost or free that a lot of after-school programs use. And so this is just pointing you to the collection that we have on our website, which is in that sort of web links pod that Brooks has. But again, there are things that you can, grab stuff from the grocery store to have a really cool activity. The curriculum itself is probably free. And things that can be done easily in sort of 1 hour chunks. So I know that Stardust has its own really great registry of curriculum and activities, but you can also check out the ones on our list as well. And then finally, I'll point you to the After School STEM Hub. This is actually a project from the After School Alliance that's done in collaboration with about 18 other national after-school organizations. But the focus is really on the piece around advocacy and communications. So how do you make the case for doing out of school time STEM? And so we engaged in some research with a firm called the Frameworks Institute that studies how Americans think and talk about education issues as well as other social issues. And we've developed a suite of communications tools to use. So there's talking points, there's sort of quick reframing guides. So I think anyone who's doing STEM education, particularly out of school time STEM education, this is a really good resource to kind of tweak your talking points, whether that's in written grant proposals or if you're doing any conference presentations, speeches, or presentations to community partners. Definitely check out this resource. Again, everything is free to use and download. And then lastly, and then just a couple of the notes for our next steps with StarNet. So again, like I mentioned, we'll be working on a longer guide with has more rich descriptions of partnerships, including things you can do and some tips for communications and working with programs. We have done a couple partnership spotlights already from those libraries who are hosting the StarNet exhibits. There will be more of those to come. And then also want to point you again at the Ideabook, which is from the Global Family Research Project. And they have lots of different types of partnerships around family engagement. And I know they're working on a new resource around STEM and family engagement that should be out in the next few months as well. So hopefully these will get you started and get you thinking, and Lights On providing a very concrete next step to get engaged with after-school partners. Thank you so much for your time, and definitely Dan and I are a resource to you guys. You can always funnel questions through the StarNet folks, and they'll get them to us as well.
All right, great. Thank you, Melissa. I'll just wait a few seconds, see if there's any questions, and if there's not, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Just as a reminder for you all, on October 4th, we are going to be hosting the International Observe the Moon Night webinar with Brian Day of NASA. And also, just to go back to, let's see, let me put these web links up here so that you'll have access to those. We'll probably offer two versions of this recording. We'll offer a YouTube version that you can just go through, and we'll also offer an Adobe Connect version where you can actually go through and click on the links in the PowerPoint. So keep your eyes out for those. I'll send you guys an email probably tomorrow or Thursday with a lot more of those resources.